It's a pleasure to be here, and we're so grateful for the support that we've received for this project, which, as Naomi was talking about with the previous collaboration, unfolded very much during a challenging time to work collaboratively and especially to gain access to institutions. So Carrie and I are going to tell you a little bit about how we came to this project and where we think it might be going. So Site Archives Site, as Anne said, is a mixed reality art intervention based at the National Archives at Seattle that interrogates the relationship of the archive to place and to the public. We've been collaborating for a while, so we'll each tell you a little bit about our individual practices that built toward this one.
Thanks, Anne and Amaranth, and thank you all for being here. We're excited to show our project, share our project with you. And we thought we'd start out the presentation, as Amaranth mentioned, with a couple of projects from our background in terms of highlighting, some of the context for our previous collaborative work and our current collaborative work. So I'm an artist, and my artworks are immersive installations that explore the relationships between art and science. So the image that you see here is from a work, Sonification Listening Up. And this was an early large-scale public art project at MIT in collaboration with the MIT Haystack Observatory. This was a site-specific project on Building 54 on the MIT campus. This image that you see here is at the base of the building looking up. And the speakers broadcast audio representations of sound waves embedded in the Earth's ionosphere, which were actually captured right above the site of this installation, and use sound as representation of research at MIT, extending to the public what is normally invisible. So this project had 35 channels of sound that were temporarily installed across the facade of Building 54 and spoke to the public research happening within the building. Another work that I wanted to highlight from previous projects that feed into our current collaboration is a work titled Wavelines. And Wavelines continued this investigation that started with Sonification Listening Up in translating scientific data into visualization and sonification work. Wavelines was a collaboration with UW oceanographic scientist, Dr. Neil Banis. And this work used data from ecosystem models from the Washington coast to create a multimodal experience of art through 6 channels of video and 5 channels of audio. So you see the 6 channels are kind of a close-up of one of the channels of video. And essentially with this work, the ecosystem models were being drawn by light lines. And then on the right-hand image, you see some of the speakers with the sonified work. And for myself, this project kind of brought together some previous work in merging digital and material artifacts. This image on the left you see is a large semi-transparent projection screen. And then the 5 channels of sonification engaged viewers and listeners with references to underlying systems of data.
So Carrie comes to this project with a deep and fabulous background in visual art and site-specific art installation and engaging larger publics and bodies of knowledge. And I come from a background that is perhaps a little more intimate from poetry. And we had wanted to work in mixed reality for a long time. So this was a great opportunity for us to come together around that. The background that I brought to the project is in augmented reality. This is an image from a collaboration from 2010 called Between Page and Screen, which is a book of poems that basically doesn't contain any text. The text only appears when the reader opens up the book in front of their webcam, and then they see themselves and they see the book, the text that's sort of been hidden within the book. And the idea within this project was to draw attention to reading as always a performative process in which the meaning of a work emerges from the meeting of the reader's body with the body of the book, and to remind us of the materiality of books and of the act of reading. So much as Carrie's really interested in that last slide in the material and the immaterial coming together, that was a significant interest in that project. This is a subsequent augmented reality collaboration, also with Brad Baus, my collaborator on the previous project, who's also my spouse. And this was a site-specific augmented reality artwork for the New Haven Free Public Libraries called Whispering Galleries, where we installed what we called listening stations in all of the branches of the Free Public Library, where viewers would encounter anonymous diaries from 1858. And by sweeping their hand over an augmented reality controller, could sort of brush dust away from the text to reveal erasure poems hidden within them. There's maybe a little connection to the idea of erasure aesthetics. I think we're, interested in these same questions about what's present and what's absent, who has been erased from the archive. And in this case, this is a totally anonymous diary from 1858 that was held by Yale, that probably no one ever even consulted, and was a diary that was kept by a worker who wanted to practice their penmanship. So the entries are usually very stock in what they tell. But if you read through much of the diary, you get a sort of the cadence for life in New Haven or closely thereabouts in 1858, which is a life that really involves the work of the hand and the labor of the hand. So this person was making trade every day, sweeping out the shop each morning, but then in the evening, they were also playing the violin and taking part in music with their hands. So I liked that we were both drawn to that idea, Brad and I, of the hand as the modality of connection for the individual whose diary it was, right? The penmanship of keeping the diary involves the hand, their labor involves their hand, and then their art also involves their hand. And using a gestural interface in which the reader's hand reaches out to this ancestor from the past and allows us to think about how our hand is located within that longer trajectory of history.
So Amaranth and I knew about each other's work and, have been colleagues. And I think that, we were kind of excited to become collaborators and, we're really interested in some of the intersections of each of our works. And in 2016, there was a call. It was an international call for speculative artist projects. So if you had 48 hours to have an artist residency on the moon, what would you do? And so I think, we started spinning and coming up with ideas and, thinking about what each of us brought to the collaboration and what we might have fun with. And so this Giant Steps call, and this was for a space, the exhibition space was downtown at King Street Station, kind of just had us, start to think about what we would do. And I think we were both excited about the speculative nature of this work. And this call was really interesting because the jury, there was a prize for this competition of what you would present or what you would come up with a 48-hour residency on the moon. And the jury included the senior curator for Vulcan, the CEO of the Museum of Flight, the founder of MIT's X Prize, and then curators and architects from our region.
So in conceiving what we would do if we were given an artist residency on the moon, we thought a lot about what has been done with the moon in the past. And in poetry, there's a really long history of poets writing poems, professing their love to the moon, sort of projecting all of their emotions on the moon, or talking about the moon's push and pull with Earth and our tides. So the moon kind of is a heavy and maybe overused theme in the realm of poetry already. And then in the realm of science, the moon was historically used as a passive reflector for sending messages back and forth to Earth before there were satellites. So we were really interested in that kind of where the scientific meets the poetic here. And we envisioned going to the moon with a very small payload. Of that little white box that you see on a pedestal would be everything we would bring. And we would take advantage of materials that had been left behind by the Apollo astronauts because there's all of this discarded material on the moon. So we thought, well, let's repurpose some of that and build a listening station on the moon that could transmit messages back and forth. So what you see here are two speakers that are hanging in the gallery that are very directional. And it's only when a visitor stands between them that they begin to hear the sound of the installation, which is a poem that is being passed back and forth from one speaker to the other in the form of a word ladder. A word ladder is a poetic form that in which each line of the poem is a single word long. And from one line to the next, only one letter in the word changes. So just as an example, the word water can change into the word wager or waver, and or so you sort of just change the one letter. So that's why it's called a word ladder. And we like the word ladder as a metaphor for the attempt to reach out to the distant lunar object, but then also because it involves slight changes over time. And we knew historically that when a message is bounced off of a remote source, there's always the chance that something will come back slightly changed in transmission. And we wanted the listener and viewer to think about that. What does it mean to project onto the moon, and what really of ourselves is reflected back to us? The collaboration involved this highly ephemeral sonic installation, but a lot of these material components that you see here.
This is one example. So we had postcards that people could take away. And this was really one of the early kind of inspirations for this project. This postcard was drawing on a historical certificate awarded to ham radio operators who tuned in to Diana's signal. So you see the original in the upper right-hand corner, and our take on it in the middle there with moon signs. And, emulating this iconic image for our own postcard, thinking about the poetic projections off of the lunar surface with this.
Yeah, and as another aspect of this, we wanted to share with people what exactly is left on the moon. So what you see here is a computer printout that was printed at the Living Computer Museum in SoDo in Seattle. They used a period-appropriate continuous pin feed printer to kind of emulate what a printout of this document from the late 60s, early 70s would have looked like. And what we wanted to was just document what is this archive on the moon that no one is actually accessing, and what can we do with what's already there? So the red dots indicate the equipment that we would repurpose. And as mentioned before, here's our payload box that has a map of the Apollo landing site. So one of the reasons that we felt it necessary to include all of these material components is that with this kind of dematerialized artwork, we felt that these would deepen the viewer's experience and connection with the immaterial aspects of the work.
And this is an image. So after wave signs, we had the opportunity to continue the collaboration to moon signs. And so this continued around the same lunar themes and interactivity as wave signs. But with wave signs, it was us providing the poetry that viewers and listeners were able to kind of to walk in between those two speakers that you saw in one of the earlier images. But with moon signs, we invited the audience to provide it. So this is an image kind of documenting one of our performances. This is at the Henry Art Gallery, James Turrell's space. And it was part of a series of events, Untuning of the Sky, that brought together poetry, film, music, inspired by the mystery and wonder of the sky. So it's really this kind of shared collaborative experience that includes audience performance within the piece.
And as part of that, we really wanted to give the audience something to hold on to and something to take away. So we created this piece of ephemera as a gift. It's an artist's volvel, similar to volvels that you may have seen in children's books, or there are astral maps basically that allow you to look at where the constellations are in the night sky by turning this circle on the top to reveal items that are printed on the page below. And in this document, what's printed below that image of the moon is a cento, which is a poem composed entirely of lines of existing poems about the moon. And then around the edge where you see the number 1, there's the lunar phase coupled with a word on the opposite edge from the word ladder poem that we created for wave signs. And the idea is that this would be treated as a kind of poetic compass for navigating the night sky, and that readers could then visitors could become poets themselves by turning this dial and reading off whatever language emerges from those holes that are positioned on it. And this just shows you a little bit of, an animated GIF to show you what that experience of turning the volvel is like. And here's a close-up view so you can see the poems themselves.
And along with the performance at the Henry, we had an opportunity to translate that at Sam Remix down at the Olympic Sculpture Park that you see as kind of a collective experience here with lights and the volvels. And, essentially for us, we were thinking and kind of continuing this into the next project that different ephemera can be a focal point for community and connection. And so those are some of the threads then that were leading us on to the collaboration that we're excited to present today. And, I think with moon signs and wave signs, to be honest, we had a lot of fun. I think, as Naomi mentioned earlier, we just really enjoyed it. And we were kind of looking for ways to, continue our collaboration. And I think both of our imaginations were sparked when we learned of the impending closure of the NARA building in Seattle's Sandpoint neighborhood, which is not too far from UW's Seattle campus. And in general, what Anne had mentioned earlier when she presented our talk and introduced our talk, in January 2020, the Federal Office of Management and Budget, appointed by Trump, announced closure, essentially telling the public that the land itself was more valuable to the federal government than the documents housed there. So here you see an image, kind of a close-up image of the NARA building.
And this is a decision that they undertook without consulting the public at all. It was, it's a group of realtors, real estate folks who know a lot about land value, but who didn't necessarily consult with the stakeholders for whom having these archival documents in the region is quite significant. So the result was that there was a 14-month-long campaign by Northwest tribes, senators from Washington and Alaska, and 25 congressional delegates from Washington, Alaska, Oregon, and Idaho, and the Washington State Attorney General. And thanks to their advocacy, just in April of this past year, the Biden administration rescinded the plan, which was, it felt like a big victory. Of course, when we proposed this project, none of that had unfolded yet. Mm-hmm. And so we were wanting to we wanted to do something that would draw attention to the kind of imperiled nature of the archive, but also to just get us thinking about what even is in this archive, which is already in this, kind of imposing looking administrative building, mid-century, brick gray building, but it actually contains a lot of important documents for our region and is also missing some important documents as well.
So this is this top-down view, and you see the scale of this building, which is really large. And, one of the things that we ran into kind of with the timeline and current moment right now was our inability to access the archives during the pandemic. So I feel, we definitely had to shift gears in terms of thinking about this as site-specific. Without actually being able to go in. We actually went in once in early March of 2020, but that was right before they closed, I think days. And so they're still closed right now. So that really kind of had us and brought up questions kind of raised by the possible removal of the documents in the archive, which was going to go to a site in Riverside, California, where they would have been unreachable for many people. And that kind of deepened our desire to consider presence and absence and the digital and material with respect to our region's archives.
So as Anne was saying, there is all of this hope pinned on digitization for accessibility purpose, both for long-term maintenance of archival records and then also for making them broadly available. But what you discover as you try to do research through an online interface into an archive that is only partially available online is that the reality of what gets digitized and by whom is that they truly reflect, they're very partial in what they reflect of what's available. And, that like multiple, it was like a football field size room that we were taken into to view the back of this facility. And it's stacked from floor to ceiling with boxes on like racks and racks of boxes. That material is, so much of that is accessed materially face-to-face by citizens coming in to do what they call like citizen archival research that is sometimes highly personal, sometimes highly public, sometimes has to do with the government and wanting to look back at the government. So all of that is sort of lost by the idea of that moving out of our state and also by it moving online. So we're interested in that tension between the desire and the reality of what's accessible. And we wanted to know about what are the ghosts in the archive and who has put them there, and how could we both bear witness to and intervene into the construction of a public archive.
Mhm. And just to give some context here too, for, the kind of background. So researchers, historians, government officials, and general public consult the facility for a wide variety of reasons, including genealogy, tribal records, land use, geographic studies, and citizen engagement for federal activities. So this trove of information included a significant number of digitized documents, many of which come from the Alaska collections, which were relocated to Seattle in 2014 when NARA closed its Anchorage location.
Once again, to save the government, millions or billions of dollars, the idea being that the archive, the land that an archive is on could actually be considered more valuable than its holdings. So our project, Site Archive Site, is about materializing the spectral presence of those digital documents that we're hoping will invite viewers to re-envision the archive and see themselves in it. So in the same way that Carrie's previous work and my previous work are really about drawing attention to the individual's relationship with these larger structures and more intimate ones, our intent with this participatory experience that would be broadly available would be to establish what we're calling a ghost archive in the space that can sort of haunt the space of the gallery as the viewer encounters it.
So this is an early concept sketch for our installation. And, as Amaranth said, investigating the troubled relationship between the original and digital facsimile when it comes to archival documents. So what we're imagining and working with right now is that people coming into this space using smartphones to reveal the digital documents arrayed around a gallery space that becomes visible through this digital interface of the mobile device. So combining digital components with material aspects of the installation and imagining illuminated plexiglass responsive to presence and people entering this space as well. And then also currently exploring, what this means in terms of inviting people in, having them walk through what type of artifacts are we working with at this point, include film footage, photographs, documents, and really this desire to invite the viewer to get close to them while also acknowledging their ephemerality. So they're dissolving and disappearing when you get too close.
Right. The idea here is that when you enter the space of the gallery, there is nothing to see other than the material installation of these plexiglass panels that have been suspended from the ceiling that reference through their shape the idea of a document. And the documents become visible when you look through your smartphone. But as you approach them or when you get too close to them, they dissolve and become inaccessible, out of reach. We tend to think of mixed reality as a purely optical experience. So that's also something that we're thinking about with this project, is how to engage the viewer's full embodied and sensory experience, including things like sound and potentially even smell and light as they're moving through this space and having an experience that is at the same time quite personal and intimate, and also quite public, because of course, as they're looking through their phones and they're seeing these virtual documents, they also see the other people who are around them in the space, which is, there's a myth that doing archival research is a very lonely and isolating practice. It can also feel like a very connected one, where you're touching artifacts that have been touched by many before you. You're seeing others in the space of the archive doing research right alongside you.
So we wanted to show a couple of videos of what this all looks like. And this is done in collaboration with our wonderful research assistant, Olivia Uman, who is a design student with some museology experience. So we have a couple of video demos here in terms of where we're at and what this is looking like as a screen capture from the mixed reality piece.
These are sample documents. They're not the finalized pieces to include, but to give us a sense as we're collaborating on this process of how different, how these different types of archival materials that are what is available through the digital archives, how they respond to motion, to sound, to the kind of uncanny place that gets created in mixed reality. This is another sample of hopefully a different spatialization that you might experience of the work.
And also through this, you can start to kind of hear, but the sound will also lead the eye in the movement in terms of how someone might be navigating the space and coming close or moving away from each of the documents.
Olivia has been great to work with and really an awesome, really collaborator in this process. And as we're continuing to refine and to think about this work, our ongoing questions are: how do you touch an invisible archive? And how are you touched by an invisible archive? And our goal with the ultimate installation of this work and realization of it is to have a large component that is responsive to the audience itself and what their thoughts are about the nature of public archives and what they mean for identity, for our regional sense of self, and for land.
And we just really appreciate the opportunity and support from the SRCP grant to explore this. And it's exciting for us to think about the exhibition possibilities of the project and how we continue to investigate and work with the archive on this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amaranth and Carrie. What a fascinating project. I'd like to open the floor for questions. Marie.
I just wonder if you could reflect a little bit on how this exhibit or your work or the conversations you have about it might help us with these questions, right? So what is digitized or not, which you talked about, but also how do you digitize it, right? So if you have in the American History Museum, you know, the gown that George Washington's wife wore to the inauguration ball, like how do you digitize that, right? Or what is a map really the same when you can't touch it, depending on what material it is, right? And then I wonder too, because you both are interested in touching, right? The hands with the books or very site-specific work. I just wonder if you could reflect on how you're doing something that's so not site-specific, because it's ephemeral, right? So if you could just talk a little bit about what digitization does or doesn't really do and how this might spur us all to think differently, that would be really great for me.
Sure. I'm not sure that we have an answer for, I think that our project is partly about raising those questions rather than providing answers, but offering a space for introspection and for also accountability as we think about our own roles with relationship to archives, both private and public. I think that one of the areas that I'm interested in that you're sort of bringing up, Marie, is how you can, how people are trying to digitize what seem like difficult to record things, like your example was of a dress, but there are researchers in the electronic literature world who are wanting to document works of electronic literature that are no longer accessible because the platforms they were written for aren't stable anymore, right? So something that was written, like my project Between Page and Screen, was written in Flash, which is now no longer supported, and you can't actually access the project that was designed to be widely available on the internet. And so how do you archive something in a way that also bears witness to the material components of what seems like a totally ephemeral digital artifact, which actually had to be experienced with particular software on a particular kind of computer with a particular kind of webcam, like all of those all of those things that are part of the piece that we tend to forget. In the same way, like you're saying with a map, there's the materiality and the tactility of it that is part of how the map communicates meaning, that is very hard to transmit digitally. So I'm really interested in those slippery points where you can sense the presence of the material components in something that is actually digital, like when you see, a Google Books scan where you can actually see the hand of the person who was holding the book on the scanner, right? Or where the body of the person encountering the artifact becomes part of the artifact. So it's one place that your question takes my mind. What about you, Carrie?
Yeah, I think all of that, but as Amaranth mentioned, this project has really changed. So when we first thought about the work prior to COVID, this was a site-specific installation with projected video onto the site of NARA, and thinking about how that physical kind of gathering, performance, installation, very time-based nature of that kind of intervention, then could be kind of offset from this mixed reality component. So at first, the mixed reality was actually this side thing. And then, here we are all behind screens, and, that it wasn't really physically possible to think about this gathering, this, site-specific installation where a large amount of people would get together for a specific night, responding to, us thinking about the exterior of NARA being a facade, that this could be kind of, again, intervened with. So, I think like with any project, you're always pulling on threads, and you're always experimenting or seeing what drives you to the next phase. And so I think, for myself, this mixed reality was something I was really excited about, specifically for sound, and how then, using sound throughout space kind of guides someone's own narrative throughout the work. And I think in that same respect, what we've come up with and kind of responded to in the archives, there's these really interesting kind of citizen archival projects where, they kind of create moments, places where people are then in like scanning parties almost, in terms of contributing to the archive. So those are kind of some questions too, in terms of who is contributing to this archive, and maybe even ways that our project could kind of help support that, or help think of ways that others could contribute other work to the archive that's missing.
Naomi, you have a comment?
I don't know if I can say an exact question. It might just be more an invitation for reflection from both of you. But yeah, like how are you thinking about how stagings of this project, or opportunities for audiences to come into this project might also be connecting to the actual land, and where the archives is, or where the different manifestations of your work happens. And in that question, there's a kind of secondary question, which is audience. Like, who do you imagine the audience for these projects to be?
Thanks so much, Naomi. I think, just in terms of the idea of audience, I mean, we showed an image from the exhibition space, but I think maybe the form of our work actually allows for this to go beyond kind of more of a formalized visual arts exhibition piece, and thinking about like how this could be then tied to different places at different times, where that invites people to maybe scan a barcode, and just allows, I think, a little bit more flexibility for where this is being kind of staged, or where this is being cited, maybe in response to like the physical site. But I think Amaranth and I are also kind of imagining kind of connection points, various institutions or various groups too, in terms of, how this then could be also like a collecting space of alternative history, thinking about like how this is bringing in more voices into the archives, and again, like how that collaboration could kind of spur kind of future iterations of the project.
Yeah, and in terms of the site and land itself, I think that we felt motivated by that initial gesture of removal, that really draws attention to the fact that these are regional archives, but they were so some of them were created regionally, and some of them are like federal agencies, that maybe don't necessarily represent the sort of the will of the people, as it were, but that these are all materials that are housed there. And knowing that actually the largest portion of digitized material comes from Alaska because they lost their archive really spoke to us in terms of the ways in which an archive is used may actually be different from the perception or intention of those who provide access. And there's a really beautiful, really long document that was created by that court case about trying to prevent the removal of the archival records, which include all kinds of amazing testimonies. It's like more than 600 pages long. So I'm still making my way through it. But one of the things I love about it is that you really get actual individual cases where people are talking about why the archives are important to them, why they're essential for our region, and why taking them, like even just as far as California, which maybe to the board that made that decision didn't seem that far, but it's like a plane flight and a missed day of work or missed 3 days of work to do whatever archival research you need to do to get there, that may seem small for some people, and then for others is actually a really huge deal. So my hope is that as we're continuing to work through this project, we can be thinking about ways in which it interrogates questions of land, of ownership and access, and maybe allows us to think about the participatory component that Carrie is talking about, and surfacing some of the ways in which an archive is a performance, and that when archival materials are not accessed, it just raises questions about what are they doing if they are not actually, if they're not performing in concert with the person who is seeking them out.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank all of our presenters today for fascinating and powerful delivery of your product. And on behalf of the SRCP grant, this is just exemplary work. Let's give our presenters a final round of applause. Thank you so much.